Karen slapped my deaf sister. Didn't know my mom's a military lawyer. It was supposed to be a simple, quiet shopping trip. My sister Ellie and I had gone to the department store to pick out some clothes. Nothing special, nothing complicated. We'd done it plenty of times before, just the two of us, enjoying the freedom of browsing the racks at our own pace. The store wasn't too busy, just a few families scattered around. Parents ushering their children toward the toy aisle, older women flipping through discounted blouses, and some employees tidying up displays. It was peaceful, the kind of calm outing that neither of us thought twice about. But looking back, I should have known better. I should have seen the signs, the way the tension in the air shifted the moment that woman entered. Ellie was standing near one of the clearance racks, her fingers gently brushing against the fabric as she examined a soft lavender sweater. She always had an eye for colors, for textures, something about the way they felt against her skin. It was one of her favorite ways to shop, running her hands over different materials, gauging their weight and comfort before even considering the style. It was part of the way she navigated the world, finding ways to make up for the things she couldn't hear. She had her hair up in a high ponytail that day, her hearing aids clearly visible, though most people didn't notice them unless they were looking. And of course, as was often the case, someone wasn't just looking, they were staring. I was a few feet away, distracted by a display of jeans when I heard an annoyed huff. At first, I didn't think much of it. People sighed all the time while shopping, when they saw a price tag they didn't like, when they realized an item wasn't available in their size, when they debated whether they really needed another jacket. It was a common enough sound. But then I heard it again, sharper this time, with an edge of impatience that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I turned my head just in time to see her, the woman who would turn this entire trip into a nightmare. She looked to be in her 40s, her blonde bob cut stiff with far too much hairspray, her face scrunched into a scowl of pure indignation. Everything about her screamed entitlement, from the way she tapped her manicured nails against her hip to the way she glared at Ellie like she had personally offended her. Ellie, of course, was completely oblivious. She hadn't noticed the woman standing a few feet behind her, arms crossed tightly, mouth twisted into a look of sheer impatience. She was focused on her shopping, flipping the sleeve of the sweater to check the tag, completely unaware that someone had decided she was a problem. The woman took a step closer and then another, her heels clicking against the floor with deliberate force as if making herself heard would somehow force Ellie to acknowledge her. I felt my stomach tighten as I started toward them, my instincts screaming that something was off, though I still didn't know exactly what was happening. The woman cleared her throat loudly. "Excuse me, young lady," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, the kind that made my skin crawl. Ellie didn't react. The woman let out an exaggerated sigh, shaking her head in disbelief before stepping directly into Ellie's personal space. "I said excuse me," she snapped, her voice louder this time, enough to draw the attention of a few nearby shoppers. I quickened my pace, moving toward them just as Ellie finally noticed the presence looming beside her. She turned, blinking in confusion at the woman's sharp expression before quickly reaching into her bag for the small notepad she always carried. She flipped it open, her pen poised to write out a response. The woman's face twisted in irritation. "Oh, for God's sake," she muttered under her breath. "What is this?" Ellie held up the notepad, the words she had quickly scribbled out written in neat, careful handwriting. "I'm deaf. How can I help you?" Instead of understanding, the woman scoffed, her disbelief morphing into something uglier, something that made my stomach churn with anger before I even reached them. "You're joking," she said, her voice rising slightly, an incredulous laugh slipping past her lips. "You can't be serious. That's not—" She cut herself off, shaking her head before crossing her arms. "You expect me to believe that?" Ellie just blinked at her, confused, tilting her head slightly as she tried to read the woman's lips. I finally reached them, stepping protectively beside my sister as I shot the woman a glare. "She's deaf," I said firmly, my voice cold, unwavering. "If you need something, just write it down." The woman turned to me, eyes narrowing as if I were the problem. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. She was ignoring me. She heard me perfectly fine, she just didn't want to answer. That's incredibly rude. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms as I struggled to keep my temper in check. "She didn't hear you," I emphasized, my tone sharp. "Because she can't. That's why she has the notepad. If you actually needed something, all you had to do was write it down instead of acting like a complete." I never got to finish my sentence. Before I could even blink, the woman's hand shot out, and in one swift motion, she slapped Ellie across the face. The sound was sharp, a sickening crack that echoed through the air, cutting through the faint hum of background music, through the quiet murmurs of shoppers, through everything. For a split second, everything seemed to slow down. I saw the way Ellie's head jerked slightly to the side, her eyes wide with shock, her lips parting in silent disbelief. I saw the slight red imprint left on her cheek, the way her fingers instinctively reached up to touch the burning skin, the way her whole body tensed as she processed what had just happened. And then, as if reality had slammed back into place all at once, I felt something white-hot surge through me. My heart pounded violently against my ribs, my vision tinged with red as I turned to the woman, my voice coming out in a furious, unfiltered yell. "What the hell is wrong with you?" The woman had the audacity to roll her eyes. "Maybe next time, she'll learn some manners and answer when she's spoken to," she said, her tone dripping with self-righteousness. Ellie was still frozen in place, her hand hovering just above her cheek, her breathing quick and uneven. I could see the way her fingers trembled slightly, the way she tried to process the fact that a complete stranger had just hit her for no reason other than existing in the same space as someone who felt entitled to her attention. I could feel the rage bubbling inside me, threatening to explode, my hands shaking with the sheer force of it. But before I could unleash the absolute fury burning in my chest, before I could take a single step toward the woman who had dared to put her hands on my sister, a store employee rushed over, their face filled with alarm. "What's going on here?" I barely managed to steady my breathing before I turned to them, my voice shaking with anger as I pointed directly at the woman who had just assaulted my sister. She just slapped my sister for being deaf. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on my chest like a boulder, making it difficult to think, to breathe, to process anything except the sheer outrage coursing through my veins. Ellie was still standing there, frozen in place, her expression caught somewhere between disbelief and silent pain, her fingers hovering over the red mark blooming across her cheek. The imprint of that woman's hand was visible, stark against her pale skin, a violent reminder of just how far some people's entitlement could go. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, a deafening thrum of fury that only intensified as the woman, this vicious, self-righteous Cairn, crossed her arms over her chest and scoffed as if she were the victim in all of this. The store employee who had rushed over looked bewildered, their wide eyes flicking between me, Ellie, and the woman responsible for all of this. "What happened here?" they asked, their voice tinged with alarm, but I barely heard them over the blood rushing through my head. I took a step forward, my hands shaking with restrained rage. "She slapped my sister," I bit out, my voice sharp and barely controlled, "because she wouldn't answer her, because she's deaf and didn't hear her." The employee's face darkened instantly, their expression morphing from confusion to horror as they turned toward the woman in question. "Is this true?" Cairn scoffed, rolling her eyes like this was all some minor inconvenience instead of a blatant physical assault on a teenage girl. "Oh, give me a break," she snapped, waving a dismissive hand as if we were all overreacting. She was being rude. When someone talks to you, you answer. If she had just acknowledged me instead of standing there acting like I don't exist, none of this would have happened. I felt like I was going to explode. Every word that came out of her mouth was laced with arrogance, with entitlement, with the kind of self-righteousness that made my skin crawl. She genuinely believed she was justified in what she had done. She thought hitting my sister, physically harming her, was an acceptable response to feeling ignored. The sheer audacity of it made my vision blur with rage. Ellie had finally started moving again, her breathing uneven as she quickly pulled out her phone and typed something on the screen. She turned it toward the store employee, her fingers gripping the device so tightly her knuckles were white. I didn't ignore her. I didn't hear her, because I can't. The employee swallowed hard, their expression shifting into something even graver as they looked back at Cairn, clearly struggling to comprehend the sheer magnitude of what she had done. "Ma'am, you hit a minor," they said, their voice edged with disbelief. "A disabled minor." Cairn threw up her hands, an incredulous scoff slipping past her lips. "Oh, please," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "I barely touched her. It wasn't even that hard. If she's old enough to be out in public, she should learn some basic manners. I was just trying to get her attention." I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms, the sharp sting grounding me just enough to keep from screaming. "You didn't tap her," I spat. "You slapped her. You hit my sister because she didn't respond to you fast enough. That's assault." The employee was nodding now, their jaw tightening as they turned toward Cairn again. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave the store immediately," they said firmly. "We don't tolerate violence of any kind here." Cairn's face twisted in indignation, her lips curling as she let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," she snapped. "You're taking their side. What about me? She was disrespectful first. You expect me to just stand there while some brat pretends I don't exist?" Ellie took a step closer to me, and I could feel her shaking slightly. I wanted to reach for her, to hold her, to make her feel safe again, but my body was locked in place, every muscle coiled tight with fury. Another store employee had arrived now, and they were already pulling out a walkie-talkie, whispering something into it. I didn't even have time to register what they were saying before I saw a flash of navy blue near the entrance, store security. Cairn followed my gaze, and for the first time I saw something flicker across her face that almost looked like uncertainty. Maybe, just maybe, it was sinking in that she had made a very, very big mistake. The first employee gestured toward the approaching security guards. "These gentlemen will escort you out," they said. Cairn's jaw clenched, and for a split second it seemed like she was debating whether to cause an even bigger scene. But then her eyes landed on Ellie, and instead of backing down, instead of accepting that she was in the wrong, she doubled down in the most disgusting way possible. She sneered. "Oh, what? You're going to run to mommy and daddy now," she taunted, her voice laced with venom. "Going to cry about how unfair life is. Maybe if your precious little disability is such an issue, you shouldn't be out in public in the first place." Ellie flinched, as if the words themselves had struck her harder than the slap had. That was it. That was the final straw. I took a step forward, barely holding myself back from physically dragging this woman out of the store myself. But before I could, Ellie's hands moved quickly as she signed something. I didn't even have to translate. She was furious. Instead of responding verbally, she yanked out her phone and typed something quickly, then turned the screen toward Cairn, her blue eyes burning with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. "My mom is a military lawyer. She will end you." Cairn blinked. For the first time since this entire nightmare began, she hesitated. I saw the moment she realized she might have actually screwed up. Her bravado wavered, her confidence cracked just slightly, and the brief flash of uncertainty in her eyes was almost satisfying. Almost. Because I wasn't satisfied. Not yet. Not until she faced real consequences. Cairn let out a forced laugh, but it was weaker this time, as if she was trying to convince herself that she still held any power in this situation. "Oh, please," she scoffed, but the smugness in her voice was fraying at the edges. "What's she gonna do, sue me, over this?" Ellie didn't answer. She didn't have to. Because right at that moment, as if the universe itself had decided that karma needed to make an immediate appearance, I heard the unmistakable sound of my mother's voice cutting through the store like a razor-sharp blade. What the hell is going on here? My breath caught in my throat. Karen turned, and the moment her gaze landed on my mom, the sheer authority radiating off of her, the sharp, commanding look in her eyes, the color drained from her face so fast it was almost comical. For the first time, she looked scared. She should be. The moment my mom's voice cut through the store, the entire atmosphere shifted. It was like the air itself had thickened, pressing down on everyone in the vicinity as if the weight of her presence alone was enough to command absolute silence. My mother, a woman who had spent years in the military handling some of the most complex legal cases, was not the kind of person you wanted to cross, especially when it involved her daughters. She was a force of nature, composed yet deadly, like the stillness before a raging storm. The second Karen laid eyes on her, I saw it, the fear. It was quick, just a flicker, but it was there, a crack in the armor of entitlement she had been parading around like a badge of honor. My mom strode forward, her sharp eyes immediately landing on Ellie, and the second she saw the red mark staining my sister's cheek, something in her snapped. She didn't say a word at first. She didn't have to. The sheer tension radiating off of her was enough to send a shiver down my spine, and I wasn't even the one in trouble. She reached out and gently cupped Ellie's face, tilting her head slightly to inspect the damage, her fingers ghosting over the forming bruise with a touch so delicate it was almost jarring compared to the ice-cold fury in her gaze. Ellie, to her credit, didn't flinch, but I could see the way her shoulders trembled just slightly, the way she exhaled a shaky breath as if my mom's presence alone had given her permission to let go of the tension she had been holding in. My mom turned her attention to me next, her voice calm, measured, but edged with something dangerous. Tell me exactly what happened. I didn't hesitate. My words poured out in a rush, fueled by anger, indignation, and the desperate need for justice. I told her everything, every single detail, from the moment Karen had approached Ellie to the exact second her hand had made contact with my sister's face. I spared nothing. I made sure my mother knew exactly how cruel, how deliberate the attack had been. By the time I was finished, my mom's expression had hardened into something terrifying. She turned to Karen, her lips curling into a sharp, humorless smile, the kind of smile that wasn't a smile at all, but rather a warning, a final courtesy before absolute devastation. So, she said, her voice deceptively soft, you thought it was appropriate to lay hands on my daughter. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, she seemed to struggle for words, like her brain was trying to process the fact that she had just picked a fight with the worst possible person. But then, as if realizing she couldn't afford to backpedal now, she straightened her shoulders and scoffed, though the sound came out weaker than before. Look, I barely touched her, she said, waving a dismissive hand as if that would somehow erase what she had done. She was ignoring me, and I was just trying to get her attention. If she had just answered me like a normal person, none of this would have happened. Ellie, who had been silent this whole time, let out a short, bitter laugh, the sound utterly devoid of humor. She pulled out her phone, her fingers moving swiftly over the screen before holding it up for my mom to read. She hit me because I didn't answer. I didn't answer because I'm deaf. My mom's jaw tightened. You mean to tell me, she said slowly, her voice dangerously even, that you assaulted my daughter because you were too ignorant to realize she couldn't hear you? Karen's face flushed red, but whether it was from embarrassment or anger I couldn't tell. Oh, don't be so dramatic, she snapped. It was just a little slap. She'll be fine. That was it. That was the moment my mother's patience officially ran out. You physically assaulted a disabled minor, she said, each word crisp, sharp, like the cutting edge of a blade. You laid your hands on a child for something that wasn't even her fault. You committed a crime in a public place with multiple witnesses, and now, instead of apologizing, you're standing here justifying it. Karen's lips parted, but my mother didn't give her the chance to speak. "I'm a military lawyer," she continued, her tone taking on that cold, calculating edge that I had seen her use in courtrooms before. "Do you have any idea how easily I can make sure you're held legally responsible for this?" Karen paled. "You are going to be charged with assault," my mother said, cutting her off with a certainty that sent chills down my spine. "There are security cameras in this store. There are witnesses who saw what you did, and you just admitted out loud to hitting my daughter." She turned her gaze toward the store employees and the security guards who had been standing there, watching everything unfold. "I want the footage pulled immediately," she instructed, "and I want the police called." Karen's panic became visible then. "Wait," she sputtered, holding up her hands as if that would somehow stop the legal freight train barreling toward her. "Wait just a minute, there's no need to get the police involved. This is just a misunderstanding. I didn't mean to." "You meant to," my mom said flatly. "You chose to hit my daughter, and now you're going to face the consequences." One of the security guards was already on his radio, speaking in a low, serious voice. The store manager had come out at some point, and after quickly being filled in on the situation, they looked at Karen with absolute disgust. "This behavior is completely unacceptable," the manager said firmly. "Not only will the police be called, but you are also permanently banned from this store and all of our locations." Karen looked like she had swallowed a lemon. "You can't do that," she screeched. "I'm a paying customer, I have rights." The manager crossed their arms. "So does the child you assaulted." Karen turned to look at the other shoppers as if hopping for someone to come to her defense, but all she found were glares and disapproving stares. No one was on her side. No one was going to back her up. She was utterly, completely alone in this. The police arrived not long after. 2 officers stepped into the store, their presence sending a ripple of murmurs through the gathered crowd. Karen stiffened, her bravado crumbling as reality finally sank in. The moment they walked up to her, my mom stepped forward, her voice steady, unwavering. "I want to press charges," she said. "She assaulted my daughter." Karen's eyes widened in sheer panic as the officers turned toward her. "Wait, no, this is ridiculous. I didn't do anything that bad." One of the officers pulled out a notepad. "We're going to need you to come with us, ma'am." Karen's face twisted in horror as the officer grabbed his handcuffs. "You can't do this," she shrieked. "You can't arrest me for this. This is insane. She's just a brat, she." The officer didn't let her finish. With swift efficiency, he clicked the cuffs around her wrists. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent." Ellie, who had been silent this whole time, lifted her phone and typed out a final message. When she turned the screen around, I barely held back a grin. "Actions have consequences." The sound of the handcuffs clicking around Karen's wrists was one of the most satisfying things I had ever heard. It was the sharp, final punctuation to the entire disaster of an encounter, the weight of justice settling over the situation in a way that left no room for argument or excuses. But of course, Karen wasn't the kind of person to go down quietly. Even as the officer secured the cuffs, she thrashed in place, her face twisted in disbelief and outrage, as if she simply couldn't comprehend that this was actually happening to her. "This is insane. You can't do this to me," she screeched, her voice shrill and grating, causing several shoppers to flinch. "I was just trying to get her attention. I barely touched her. This is all being blown completely out of proportion." The officer holding her remained completely unfazed, his expression neutral, professional, and utterly unimpressed. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "you are being detained for assaulting a minor. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Karen's face was rapidly shifting from red to an almost sickly shade of pale as reality finally started to sink in. She opened her mouth to argue again, but the other officer, a stern-looking woman with her hair pulled into a tight bun, cut her off with a pointed look. "You've already admitted to striking the victim, and we have multiple witnesses corroborating their statement. We'll also be reviewing the store's security footage. I strongly suggest you cooperate." Karen sputtered, looking around wildly as if searching for anyone who might come to her defense. But there was no one. Every single person in the store, from the employees to the other shoppers, was staring at her with a mixture of disdain and disgust. She had no allies here, no sympathetic bystanders willing to step up and plead her case. She was utterly alone, and for the first time since this entire ordeal had started, she seemed to realize it. "This is ridiculous," she muttered under her breath, though her voice lacked the same smug confidence it had before. She tried to square her shoulders, to salvage whatever dignity she thought she had left, but it was pointless. The cuffs, the officers, the silent glares of everyone around her, they all made it crystal clear that she wasn't getting out of this. I turned my attention away from her, my pulse still hammering from the sheer intensity of everything that had just happened. My mom stood beside me, her expression unreadable as she kept a firm hand on Ellie's shoulder, her presence solid and grounding. Ellie, for her part, looked exhausted. The red mark on her cheek had faded slightly, but it was still visible, a glaring reminder of the violence that had taken place. She hadn't spoken or signed a word since the police had arrived, her usual bright energy dimmed by the sheer weight of the situation. I felt my anger flare up all over again. Karen had done that to her. She had taken what should have been a normal, uneventful shopping trip and turned it into a moment of fear, humiliation, and unnecessary pain. And for what? Because she couldn't stand the idea of being ignored for 2 seconds. Because she was so wrapped up in her own entitlement that she thought hitting a child was an acceptable way to demand attention. The sheer audacity of it still made my head spin. The store manager stepped forward then, clearing their throat before addressing my mother directly. "We want to apologize for what happened here today," they said, their voice sincere, laced with the kind of genuine regret that Karen had never even attempted to show. "We take incidents like this very seriously, and I assure you, this woman will never be allowed in any of our stores again. We've already flagged her in our system as permanently banned." My mom nodded once, sharp and precise, but her expression remained cool. "That's a good start," she said, her voice even. "But I also expect full access to your security footage. We'll need it for the legal case." The manager didn't hesitate. "Of course. We'll cooperate with any legal action you decide to take. We'll make sure the police get a copy as well." At the mention of legal action, Karen let out a strangled noise, somewhere between a scoff and a whimper. "You're really going to sue me over this?" she asked, her voice cracking with something dangerously close to panic. It wasn't even that bad. I didn't hurt her. There's no need for all this." My mom finally turned to look at her, and the sheer coldness in her gaze sent a visible shudder through Karen's body. "You hit my daughter," she said, her tone like ice. "You humiliated her. You physically assaulted a disabled minor in public, in front of multiple witnesses. You chose to escalate a situation that never should have existed in the first place. So yes, you are going to face every single legal consequence for what you did." Karen opened her mouth to argue, but before she could get another word out, the officer holding her arm gave a small tug, signaling that it was time to move. "We're done here," he said, leading her toward the exit. I watched as Karen was marched through the store, past rows of silent, judgmental onlookers, past employees who were whispering under their breath, past the racks of clothing where this had all started. And then, just before she was taken out the door, she turned one last time, her eyes locking onto Ellie. For a second I thought she might try to apologize, to mutter out some half-hearted excuse in a desperate attempt to save face. But instead, she did the exact opposite. Her mouth curled into a bitter, twisted sneer, and she spat out one final, venomous remark. "This is why people like you should just stay home." Ellie didn't flinch. She didn't recoil. She didn't look away. Instead, with slow, deliberate movements, she lifted her phone and typed something. Then she turned the screen toward Karen. "Enjoy your criminal record." Karen's face twisted in rage. But before she could say another word, the officers pulled her outside. The second she was gone, the tension in the air seemed to snap like an overstretched rubber band. People started talking again, employees moved back to their stations, and the store seemed to breathe in relief. My mom exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over her temple before turning to Ellie. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Ellie hesitated for a moment before signing her response. "I'm tired." I reached out, squeezing her hand gently. "Let's go home." My mom nodded in agreement, her sharp, legal warrior expression softening just slightly. "We'll deal with everything else later," she said, her voice steady. "Right now, we're done here." And with that, we walked out of the store together, leaving behind the chaos, the anger, and the entitled woman who had thought she could get away with hurting my sister. She had learned the hard way that actions have consequences, and thanks to my mom, those consequences were just beginning. The car ride home was quiet, the kind of silence that wasn't necessarily uncomfortable but was heavy with everything that had just happened. The air felt thick, filled with unspoken emotions, the lingering shock of what had transpired at the store still hanging over us like a storm that hadn't fully passed. Ellie sat in the backseat, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her gaze focused on the passing scenery outside the window. She hadn't signed or typed anything since we left. She was processing it all in her own way, just as I was, just as my mother was, though I could see the way my mom's grip on the steering wheel had tightened, her knuckles turning pale, her posture rigid. She was still in fight mode, her legal mind already working through the next steps, already thinking about how to make sure Karen faced the full force of the law for what she had done. I shifted slightly in my seat, my own thoughts tangled in a mess of anger, frustration, and residual adrenaline. I had never felt such a deep, unrelenting sense of rage toward another person before. I had always known people like Karen existed, the entitled ones, the ones who thought the world revolved around them, the ones who believed they were above common decency. But experiencing it firsthand, watching her physically lash out at my sister just because she couldn't handle the idea of being ignored, had changed something inside me. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was something deeper, something sharper, the kind of fury that wouldn't fade easily. When we finally pulled into the driveway, my mom put the car in park but didn't move. She took a deep breath, exhaling slowly before turning in her seat to face Ellie. She signed carefully, her movements steady and deliberate. "Are you okay? Do you want to talk about it?" Ellie hesitated for a long moment before responding. "I don't know what to feel." She swallowed hard, her fingers hovering in the air before she signed again. "I feel angry. I feel small. I feel like no matter how much I try, there will always be people like her who see me as less. And I hate that." Her hands dropped into her lap, her fingers curling slightly, her expression a mixture of frustration and exhaustion. My mom reached over and gently took one of her hands, squeezing it in reassurance. "You are not small," she said firmly, making sure Ellie could see her lips. "That woman tried to make you feel powerless because she couldn't handle being ignored for 2 seconds. But she's the one who lost today, and I promise you she is going to regret what she did." Ellie gave a small nod, but I could still see the doubt in her eyes, the lingering hurt that no amount of legal action could erase. I hated that Karen had gotten to her, that she had managed to plant even a tiny seed of self-doubt in someone as strong as Ellie. My sister had spent her entire life proving that she was capable, that being deaf didn't make her any less, that she could exist in a world that often didn't accommodate her without needing to apologize for it. And yet, in a single moment, a single slap, that woman had tried to take that from her. "Not on my watch." I turned fully in my seat, my expression serious as I signed. "Karen wanted to make you feel powerless, but look at what happened. She was arrested. She was humiliated. She lost. And you walked out of there with your head held high. You won." Ellie blinked at me, her lips pressing together as if she was trying to hold something back. Then, finally, she signed again. "I just don't understand why people like her exist." I didn't have an answer for that. I wished I did. I wished I could tell her that the world was fair, that people like Karen would always get what they deserved, that justice would always be swift and absolute. But the truth was, there would always be people like Karen, people who believed their time, their presence, their existence was more important than anyone else. People who would never see past their own entitlement. The only difference was that this time, one of them had actually faced the consequences. And those consequences were just beginning. The next few days were a blur of legal proceedings. My mother wasted no time in making sure the case against Karen was airtight. She filed the charges immediately, ensuring that Karen wouldn't be able to weasel her way out of accountability. The store had already provided the security footage, which showed everything. From the moment Karen had approached Ellie to the exact second she had struck her, all of it captured in crystal clear detail. There was no room for interpretation, no way for her to argue that it had been a misunderstanding or an accident. She had hit Ellie on purpose, and the law wasn't going to let her walk away from it. Karen had to appear in court 2 weeks later. I didn't go. I didn't want to waste another second of my life in the same room as that woman, but my mom did. She sat in the courtroom with the kind of unwavering confidence that only a seasoned lawyer could possess, watching as Karen squirmed in her seat, realizing that she had officially lost control of the narrative. She tried to plead her case, tried to paint herself as the real victim, claiming that she had been unfairly targeted, and that she was being treated like a criminal for something that wasn't that big of a deal. The judge disagreed. Karen was found guilty of assaulting a minor. She was ordered to pay a hefty fine, sentenced to community service, and required to attend court-ordered anger management classes. And, as if that wasn't satisfying enough, my mom made sure the conviction stayed on her permanent record. She would carry that stain with her for the rest of her life. No more waltzing into stores expecting to be catered to. No more entitlement shielding her from the reality of her actions. From now on, every time she applied for a job, every time someone did a background check on her, every time she tried to pretend she was just another average person, her past would be right there, staring back at her. As for Ellie, she was still healing, not just from the physical mark Karen had left on her, but from the emotional weight of it all. It wasn't something that would disappear overnight, but she wasn't letting it define her either. A week after the court ruling, I found her at her desk, working on something in her sketchbook. When I asked what she was drawing, she turned it around to show me. It was a simple but powerful image, a hand, open and poised mid-slap, breaking apart like shattered glass. Below it, she had written in bold letters, "Some actions can't be undone." I smiled. "That's amazing," I told her. She gave me a small, knowing smirk before signing. Karen would hate it. I laughed even better. Life moved on after that. The world didn't change overnight. There would still be Karens. There would still be people who refused to understand, who refused to see beyond their own privilege. But there would also be people like Ellie, people who refused to be silenced. And as long as that was true, the Karens of the world would never win.